Good morning, everyone, and welcome to OETC and Microsoft's M365 webinar series. I'm James Kelly, OETC's Marketing Coordinator. Today's session will cover managing Windows 11 and Windows 11 SE with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. We'll also highlight some differences between the two operating systems and, most importantly, answer the question, should you stay with Windows 10 for another year, adopt Windows 11, or move to Windows 11 SE? The session will be presented by Richard Balsley, a Principal Specialist at Microsoft. This session is also being recorded, and we will send it out early next week, along with the slide deck. There will be time for Q&A at the end, so feel free to ask your questions throughout the webinar. On the next slide, I'll take a quick moment to highlight OETC's renewal team, some of whom are on today's webinar. If you have any licensing questions whatsoever, you can reach out to help@oetc.org, and someone from the team will be happy to assist you. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Richard.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, James. So as James mentioned, my name is Richard Balsley. I'm a principal specialist here at Microsoft. My primary role is to focus on device management. And so I've been doing device management for 20 years, going back to the old SMS days using SMS 2.0 and SMS 2003. So if you're not familiar with those, then it might be a good thing. So today we're going to really talk, like James mentioned, we're going to be talking about Windows 11 SE and Windows 11, the differences between the two, and from a Windows 11 management perspective, what should you really be focusing on? And then some calls to action, like what should you be doing to prepare for this coming school year during the summer as you're getting ready. So let's lead off with 11 SE, because this is something that you're going to start to see if you haven't seen it already, or if you're not familiar with 11 SE. 11 SE is a brand new operating system from Microsoft designed for K through 8 grade levels, with the goal of offering a simplified and secure experience that is optimized for a cloud-first world. And so what we really mean by that is providing an operating system that really works well on low-cost devices that is really optimized for that experience. And so with 11 SE, what you'll find on these devices is that they're going to come built with Microsoft 365 apps, or what you guys are probably familiar with, Office 365. They'll be built right into the device, so you don't have to deploy Office on those machines. It's also a more streamlined environment, which is designed to improve focus. And so what we hear a lot from customers is that Windows is complicated for students. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things that they can click on. There's a lot of things that they can get in trouble with. And so what we've done with 11 SE is we've really designed it to strip out some of those things that can be more confusing for students or make it difficult for them to focus on the things that they should be focused on. We've also made it so that students can't download things by default. So they can't go to Chrome or go to Edge, open up the browser, go download some random application. We've actually blocked that by default. And I know a lot of you have probably done this on your own through App Locker or various other methods to prevent students from downloading things they shouldn't be doing. And so we're just including that directly out of the box. But what we're also doing is making it so that you as an IT admin can deploy things like Chrome. You can deploy things like Zoom to the devices via Intune. And so by being able to do that, you now have control of what apps are installed on the device. However, we're not allowing you to install anything you want as an IT admin. There are limitations to the applications that you will be able to install. And we'll talk more about that later and where you can go to look and see what that application, the approved application list is. Now, again, I mentioned that we are optimizing the performance on these low-cost devices. And so, and how we're doing that is we're actually taking, we're looking at the applications that are used in the foreground, and we're providing more resources to those applications, and we're getting less resources to applications that are in the background. Because you have to remember that these devices, generally speaking, for the low-cost segment, you're looking at 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of disk space. And that, in our limitations in 11 SE, that'll actually go up to 128 gigs of disk space. And we'll look at the hardware requirements here in a bit. But in terms of the optimized performance, we're really trying to do this with curated education first apps and tools that are designed for productivity. We're also looking at making the devices faster on boot up. So that way your students can take these devices, turn them on, and they're getting right into a productive state without having to wait for the operating system to load. And so when we look at the optimizations of these devices, what are we actually doing here? So the first thing is that we're designing these for one-to-one deployments. I know prior to COVID, prior to the pandemic, most schools would have shared cart scenarios, and students would go grab a device out of the cart, and they may not grab the same device every time. And so in those scenarios, you were flipping, you'd have the student would have one device today, they have another device tomorrow, and they'd have to create a different profile on each of those devices. And that was a very poor experience for the first time you're signing into a new device every single time. You got to wait for your profile to get created and all those things. But after the pandemic, the CARES Act funding, ECF funds, all these funds have come about, and now we're starting to see one-to-one is something that most districts aspired to do prior to the pandemic. Now it's more of a reality. And so because it's more of a reality, with our design choices around 11 SE, we're designing this more for that one-to-one reality that's here today. That was just pulled forward because of the pandemic. So we're not recommending that you use these for shared scenarios. You could, but it's not really what these were designed for. The next thing to mention here is the IT programmable start and taskbar. Not drastically different from Windows 10. You could customize the start menu, you can customize the taskbar. What is drastically different is how you do it. With Windows 11, there are pins for applications that you can pin to the start menu. You do it a slightly different way than you would have done it with Windows 10. As I mentioned earlier, locked apps. So when we say locked apps, what this really means is that students can't install or uninstall applications. They won't have the rights to do that. If they try to do that, an error message comes up saying that we have blocked, XYZ application from running. And again, this is all out of the box. You don't have to configure any policies in Intune or any policies in group policy or any of those things. This is also cloud-backed. And so what we mean by cloud-backed is that the recommendation is for students to store things in OneDrive or OneDrive for Business. They should not be installing or saving things locally on the machine. And what we've also done in File Explorer is we've hidden the This PC and network options. So when a student goes to the File Explorer, they won't see the C drive. They will see OneDrive for Business, but they won't see the C drive, so they can't go into the other folders. Now, they will be able to see their documents. They will be able to see downloads and all the other profile-specific folders, but they won't be able to see the full C drive. It's hidden. If they want to unhide it, they could. They'll probably figure it out. They're kids. They generally do those things. But by and large, we try to reduce some of these things so that they aren't getting into places they shouldn't be by default. What we're also doing in the bottom left-hand corner here, the windowing optimized for screen size and perf. So by default, things will open full screen for students. So you don't have this tiny window that a student clicks on something and just some tiny random window opens and they can't find it. It's hidden behind some other window. They'll be able to see that full screen. And from a snapping perspective, we've limited it to 2 apps can be snapped side by side. And we'll see this in the demo as I go through what 11 SE looks like. You'll actually see what this experience is like for the student. Guided learning. So from a guided learning perspective, we've essentially created a Get Started application, and the Get Started application has a guided steps for them for the students on how to use the device. You might have your own way that you or your teachers might have their own way of how they show students to use their devices. Up to you on how you guys want to handle that. We're just providing something in box. I mentioned focus is a big thing. Again, we're trying to keep students focused on the things they should be focused on, not all the other stuff in the operating system. And last, as I mentioned earlier, 464 perf enhancements. This is just essentially 4 gigs of RAM, 64 gig hard drives. We're really trying to improve performance on these device types because these are the device types that are going to be the lowest cost in the channel. And then this is just a comparison chart between Windows 10, 11, and SE. I'm not going to go over every single bullet, but I have highlighted the items that are different between 11 and 11 SE. And so things like running all Windows applications, as I mentioned earlier, 11 SE won't be able to do that. It will run specific Windows applications, but it won't run everything. Again, the thing here is around performance and around getting students the applications that they need and not allowing everything to be able to run on the device. From a hardware perspective, devices with greater than 128 gigs, greater than 128 gigs of storage or greater than 8 gigs of memory, you won't find any 11 SE devices that have more than 8 gigs of memory that have more than 128 gigs of storage. If you need those devices, which you undoubtedly will, you're looking at Windows 11 or Windows 10, depending on who you're purchasing from and what offers they've got. I mentioned the apps, streamlined experience, all of that is there for Windows 11 SE. Improved Windows snapping. We've improved the snapping experience with Windows 11 to snap multiple applications. We made it just, I think, more discoverable for end users. But in 11 SE, like I mentioned earlier, we're only snapping 2 windows side by side. You won't be able to do more than that because, again, these devices are low-end laptops that have fixed screen sizes. So you're not going to snap like 4 different windows together. Customizable widgets. We've actually removed widgets completely in 11 SE. So if you're using 11 today and you're trying to manage, or even in 10, you try to manage the news and interests that came up in Windows 10, back about a year or so ago, a lot of customers wanted to turn that off because it has news and things that isn't really applicable for students. So in 11 SE, we just totally removed the whole thing. So you won't even have to worry about having to disable that because it's not going to be there at all. Microsoft Store. So the Microsoft Store, a lot of us with Windows 10, we disabled the store, right? Or we disabled the public store and we only allowed students to be able to see the private store. Well, with Windows 11 SE, we've totally removed the store. So students won't be able to have access to the Microsoft Store and download things that they shouldn't be downloading. We're also, like I mentioned earlier, we're defaulting to cloud file storage. And to sign into these devices, so this is what's going to be different than what you might be used to today. If you're managing devices on premises, then you're domain joining those devices and you're signing in with an on-premises domain account. With 11 SE, we will be using cloud identity. So this means you're using an Azure Active Directory account to sign into the device, and the device will be managed by Microsoft Intune. And we'll look at that as I demo 11 SE here in a minute. I mentioned earlier, 128 gigs of storage, you're not going to find it on 11 SE, you're not going to find it more than 8 gigs of RAM. Large core processor. So what this means is, if you're looking at like an i7 processor, you won't find devices with i7s. You won't find devices with, I don't even think i5. So again, you're looking at probably Celeron processors. I don't know if we're going to see i3, but Celeron, I know right now today you will be seeing those processors. Again, we've optimized for that specific use case for that processor type, and so that's what you'll be seeing on these lower end devices. And you won't be able to switch out of 11 SE. So if any of you looked at Windows 10S a while back, you had the option of moving from 10S to 10 Pro, and there's a switch that you could do to get out of 10S. You won't have that capability in 11 SE. The 11 SE devices will ship with a 11 SE image, and that image you can't get out of it. There's some policies that will restrict you. So you're basically stuck with 11 SE on these devices. Okay, so let's take a look at what 11 SE looks like here. So I'm going to stop presenting, and then I will share my screen. And so hopefully you guys can see all this. On my screen here, I've got a virtual machine of Windows 11 SE. And this device, it was provisioned with Autopilot. And if you're not familiar with Autopilot, if you're using Apple today and use like their device enrollment program or Apple device enrollment, I think is what they're calling it now, Autopilots are basically our take on that. And so imagine that this device was enrolled by your OEM or your reseller. You purchase through them. They add that device to your tenant. And when you sign into the device as a student or as just a regular member of the tenant, you will get into the device and Intune will deploy your applications and settings. And so that's what's happened. And so what you can see on here is I've got Teams already on the machine. I've got Chrome that has been deployed by Intune. Those are right here on the desktop. And so when we click into the Start menu, it looks just like Windows 11. If you haven't seen Windows 11, then it's the first time you're seeing it, then this is the new look and feel that we have to Windows 11. It's different. But what we'll see here is that that Office has already been installed. It comes again pre-installed with Windows 11 SE. But what we also notice here is that Minecraft is installed as well. Flipgrid, we're including that too. So if your educators are using Minecraft in the classroom, if they're using Flipgrid in the classroom, those applications are already pre-installed out of the box. But what you'll also notice here is if I go click on all apps, that a lot of things have been removed. There are things, like the Xbox app, Skype, things that you probably are removing out of Windows 10 today. They've already been removed out of the operating system. And so you don't have to go and remove those. If I just click on Word here, what you'll notice is that with the Office apps, we can configure the experience so that single sign-on works. And so as I open up Office, we'll see here that it's changed to my student account and that my application, or not my applications, but my documents are already showing up from OneDrive for Business because OneDrive for Business has already been pre-configured. And so to see that, if I open up File Explorer, we'll see in File Explorer, like I mentioned earlier, that we don't see the C drive, we don't see this PC, we don't see network, but what we do see is OneDrive for Business. And so OneDrive for Business, this was pre-configured in Intune. So within Intune, I can go and configure OneDrive for Business to configure silently. So that way my IT department or my students or faculty members, whoever, they don't have to go through and actually configure this. We can do it as IT on their behalf. And so that's what I've done here. And so if you wanted to show this PC, you can just go under the view settings like I just did, and you can show this PC, show network, and you'll be able to see the drive. So students, they'll probably discover it, but we just, by default, we try to hide things so that way there's not so many things that can distract a student. Let's see here. And with that, anything else I want to mention here? I think it pretty much takes care of, actually, what I did want to mention is if I open up Edge and I go try to download an application, say we just go to Firefox and just go download Firefox. And so the download will be allowed, it's not blocked. But as I try to run it, it'll say, hey, can't run it, we're blocked. And that's because Windows 11 SE is using what we call Windows Defender Application Control. And there's a policy within Defender Application Control for 11 SE to prevent the installation of any other applications. And so things like command prompt, our students, I talk to customers all the time, hey, how do I block command prompt? There's a process to do that within Intune. It's kind of an elaborate process to do that through App Locker and various other policies. And so we just, out of the box, we do that for you. So command prompt can't run. Let's try PowerShell. Because students are messing with PowerShell these days. Click on PowerShell, doesn't run either. And what about regedit? Because kids like to mess around with the registry and do things there. Now, if they're standard users, they can't really do a whole lot in the registry. But again, we block regedit. So a lot of the things that our kids are doing these days that we have to, play that game of whack-a-mole, right? We're always trying to stop what they're doing. They come up with some new way of doing things. We've got all that stuff just locked down right in the operating system. And so you don't have to create your own custom policies and play that whack-a-mole game with them. And so with that, that's 11 SE. Now I'm going to go back and share. And for the questions, I'll be answering questions at the end. So if you're asking a question and I haven't gotten to answer those yet, I'll get those at the end. I also have a few counterparts on my side that are in the chat that will probably be answering questions there as well. So let me stop the screen share, and then let's get over to the back to the deck. Present in Teams. Okay. I think we were here. Okay. So let's shift focus from 11 SE over to just basic Windows 11 management. And this is going to be a fairly easy conversation because not really a whole lot has changed from a management perspective. Yes, the start menu's changed. Yes, how we customize the start menu is different. But by and large, policies that you're used to deploying with Windows 10 today will work just fine with Windows 11. But the big question is hardware, right? You know, Windows 11, when we made that announcement, a lot of customers were concerned about, you know, my hardware isn't going to work. You know, Microsoft, you're telling me I need TPM 2.0. You're telling me that I need Intel, you know, Gen 7, Gen 8 processors. You know, I can't run my old devices on Windows 11. So how do I know if my hardware is ready? You know, to be honest, a lot of your hardware probably won't run Windows 11. And that's okay. You don't have to move to Windows 11. Windows 10 is going to be supported until 2025. So moving right now this summer, probably something that, you know, to be honest, I don't think most school districts will be moving to Windows 11 this summer. I think the following year, I think 2023 is most likely where you're going to see most districts make that attempt to go to Windows 11. We're going to have another release this summer. You'll probably see it in the fall. That'll be for Windows 11. And that's probably the release that most of our education customers will be adopting. We'll talk about release lifecycle here in the next slide. But here are the questions that you really need to start asking yourself. You know, how do I know if my hardware is ready? And then what do I need to change in order to manage Windows 11? Again, not a whole lot you're going to have to change. We'll talk more about that here in a sec. What do your end users need to know? I think this is probably going to be the biggest question that you're going to have is how do I get my end users ready for this? Because the look and feel, like we just looked at with 11 SE, that's exactly the same look and feel for Windows 11. So how do you get your end users ready to just know that, hey, you know, things are a little different? And you're going to have questions about how to handle the user rollout of this. The IT rollout, you know, for the controls and the things that we do, those controls and things are going to be very similar. But what about our coexistence? And I think this is really a concern that I'm hearing from a lot of education customers where I don't want to have classes that have Windows 10 and then I have other classes that have Windows 11. I want either them all to be Windows 10 or I want them all to be Windows 11. But I don't want to have to manage a mix of both 10 and 11. And so how are we going to handle that? And to answer that question, I think a lot of us will have to talk to our hardware vendors and understand what our OEMs are planning from a Windows 11 perspective. Are they planning on the hardware that we're purchasing today? Are they planning on dropping 10 and just moving to 11? Are they going to maintain Windows 10? And these are conversations that I would, if I were you, I would have these conversations with my OEMs today to understand what their plans are for offering Windows 10. Because if you do have a requirement that says, hey, I need to be on Windows 10 for the next 2 years, you need to work with your OEMs today to let them know that this is what you want. Because if you wait till too late and they've already made the determination that they're not going to be providing Windows 10 for older devices that you plan on purchasing, now you're going to run into some problems down the road. So this is the opportunity today to think about and ask about from your OEMs what their plans are with 11. And if you're planning on going full on 11, you're like, hey, everything looks good here. We're fine with the start menu. We're fine with the look and feel. Then by all means, adopt 11. I mean, no one's telling you not to. But if you do perceive that you're going to have some challenges with the look and feel, the start menu, the experience, you want to maintain everything on 10, have those conversations today with your OEMs. So life cycle. So let's talk about this. This was a challenge when Windows 10 first came out. We were telling customers, hey, we're going to do 3 releases a year. And then everyone kind of laughed at us because that's a lot of releases a year. And as education customers, we can't really handle that much change during the school year, right? And so there were challenges with having to, you know, limit we even dropped down to 2 releases a year. And that was still somewhat challenging of being able to control and know when the next release of Windows was going to come on our devices. If you're using SCCM or WSUS, you pretty much had control of that. But if you're just using Windows Update or Windows Update for Business, you potentially had to set deferral policies, and you're playing this game of trying to figure out how many days to defer, so I didn't have to, run the risk of getting Windows 10 feature update, during the school year on my devices. And so we've changed the life cycle here. So again, with Windows 10, 2 releases a year, and we would provide you with, if you're running the enterprise or education SKUs, you would have 18 months of support if they were the spring release, or 30 months of support with the fall release. And so as a customer, if it were me, I would just only deploy the fall releases because I got 30 months of support. And so if I had a machine that was, if I had machines that we weren't upgrading for a year, that's fine. If they weren't upgraded for 2 years, okay, that's 24 months. And so I would just take the fall releases. But with Windows 11, we've changed that. And so now we're going to 1 release per year. And so as you saw last year, we announced Windows 11 late summer, and we had the release in October. And so that's the cadence that you should expect moving forward, is that we're looking at a fall release of this year for the next release of Windows 11. And so that's what you should be planning for. Now, as education customers, it's kind of difficult to deploy a release that comes out in the fall because we've got school starting. So this is why I suspect that most customers probably start looking in 2023, is because you're probably going to want some of the new features and new functionality that come in 2022, but it's going to be too late for the 2022-2023 school year. So you're looking at the 2023-2024 school year for most larger scale Windows 11 deployments. And what's changed here is that from a support perspective, enterprise editions, which is enterprise or the education SKUs, will have 36 months of support. So you get 3 years of support for a Windows 11 release. That's not to say we recommend you waiting for 3 years, but you will have support for those releases for 3 years. Generally speaking, though, I would suggest that if I'm managing my Windows 11 rollouts, that every summer, for a school year, stick with the same release, but then as the next school year comes along, the summer is the opportunity to upgrade to the next release of Windows 11. Now, obviously, test, make sure everything works, but for the most part, the summers are when we should be looking at taking the next feature releases as they're made available. All right, hardware requirements. The biggest hardware requirement challenge that we have is compatible processors. And so you'll have these slides after the presentation. There's a link here for on the processor, where I have it highlighted here under processor, where it says compatible 64. That link there will take you to the processor support list. There's a lot of processors on the list that are supported, but generally speaking, most Intel Gen 7 or earlier processors will not be supported. And I know in education, we have a lot of devices that are older that just won't work. And it's not a big deal. You will still be able to run Windows 10 on those machines. Again, Windows 10 till 2025. Or it becomes a big deal, though, is if you start buying a lot of devices that only come with Windows 11, and now we get into this, I've got this coexistence thing we talked about earlier. If you really want them all on the same platform, having to manage 10 and 11, that could be problematic and challenging. So do understand that could be a concern. Now, TPM. So this was the elephant in the room where everyone was like, hey, we don't have TPM. Actually, you probably do. It's just probably not configured. Most devices, actually all devices that were shipped as of July 2016 will have TPM2 support. Whether that's a discrete physical chip or firmware-based TPM, those are two different, those are both supported TPM implementations. In fact, most processors today will use firmware-based TPM. But the problem, though, is that you may not have TPM turned on in the firmware of the device. You may not have Secure Boot turned on in the firmware of your devices. And that's where if you run any of the Windows 11 compatibility tools and they say, oh, you don't have TPM, you probably do. It's just not turned on. And so you have to work with your vendor to figure out how to enable that on a larger scale, right? Because they'll provide you with tools to manage the firmware, to manage the BIOS. And those tools will help you do that remotely for a large bulk of machines. And you can deploy those either through SCCM, you could do Intune, or some other third-party platform tool. So you'll have to work with your vendor to see how you can turn those things on. Everything else is pretty much table stakes from a hardware perspective. This is all just general hardware requirements. But how can you find out on a much larger, broader scale that you're ready for Windows 11? And the way that you do that is through Intune. You can also do it through SCCM. On this slide, there's a link that takes you to a tech community blog post that says Understanding Readiness for Windows 11 with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And there we provide a script that you can run for SCCM managed machines. You can run this script that will tell you the devices that are capable of running Windows 11. But if you're running Intune, or if you're running co-management with SCCM and Intune, you have available to you Endpoint Analytics. And within Endpoint Analytics, this will show you a report that will tell you which machines are ready for Windows 11 or not. And in the future, we're also going to provide some additional reports as well through other solutions like Update Compliance, which many of you may not be familiar with it. Update Compliance is a feature within Intune that shows you how compliant you are from an update perspective with Windows updates. And within that tool, we'll also have some additional information about Windows 11 readiness as well. So there are some other avenues that you can look at to see if your hardware estate is ready for Windows 11. Okay, so from a management perspective, how do we deploy Windows 11? Well, it's not really all that different from 10. Okay, so if you were deploying with SCCM with 10, you were using the feature updates functionality within Intune, those things are still available today. So on premises, if you're using WSUS or SCCM, nothing changes there. Same exact process. In the cloud, if you're using Microsoft Intune or Windows Update for Business, we will configure and manage those upgrades to Windows 11 the exact same way. And if you're using a third-party management tool, Tanium, Landesk, any of those big fixes, all those tools, however you were doing Windows 10 management, should be the same with Windows 11. You'll have to talk to them, though, if there's anything that's changed. But by and large, the whole process to upgrade really isn't that much different. Now, some of you are probably really early in your journey with moving to the cloud and managing your devices. And we're going to have a session later on this month. I think it's in 2 weeks. It could be next month. But we are going to have a session on managing devices with Intune. And in that session, I'll talk about how we enroll devices, how we push out applications and settings, and all of those things. So if you're new and you haven't done any of this with Intune yet, don't worry. We will talk more about that at a more of a level 100, level 200 level, and how to get you started. But on this slide here, this is the journey slide of, hey, how do we modernize our endpoints? How do we get from on-premises to the cloud? And so this is where you have to start with identity and how we synchronize our objects from on-premises, our user identities up to the cloud. Most of us have probably done that already, but then it's moving from there to, okay, how do we get our files from on-premises up to the cloud using OneDrive for Business, leveraging Teams, and those types of solutions, and then finally getting the device in. And this is where we onboard into Intune and Azure Active Directory. And so that's kind of the piece where I spend most of my time, is helping customers get the devices onboarded and in the cloud so that they can be managed. And as we move through the rest of the journey, endpoint security, how we manage Windows Defender, how we manage Secure Boot, BitLocker, all of the security policies on the device, and then how we service the device, deploying applications out. Again, all this stuff is done through Intune. And then the device management piece, virtualizing endpoints, Microsoft managed devices, all this is really that whole security device management story that it's just a big journey that we're all kind of on today. Now, Fast Track. So Microsoft Fast Track, if you're not familiar with this is essentially my call to action. If you're early in the process of trying to migrate or manage devices in the cloud, If you're a customer that has 150 seats of Microsoft 365 A3, if you're on A5, you need a minimum of 150 seats. If you have that, you could also have, if you have some of our a la carte licensing, like you might have EMS. There are other licensing constructs that you could have. Most customers I deal with today are using A3. But if you have those licenses, you have a fast track benefit offer to you that you may not be using, or you may not even be aware of it. And what fast track does is you can have an engineer, someone similar to me, that can go through and actually help you set up your environment. They'll get on meetings with you. They'll guide you through how to onboard your devices, how to deploy applications and settings through Intune, how to configure your tenant, how to configure various things. And this is a free benefit. I say free, you've paid for it through your licensing, but we essentially provide this as a no additional cost benefit to you. And so again, as I mentioned, you can use Fast Track for really it's this middle thing here, this ongoing remote guidance from our specialists. And if you're looking at data and email migration, like if you're looking to go from like Box to OneDrive or some other third-party storage solution to OneDrive, or if you're going from like Gmail to Exchange Online, we do provide migration assistance as well. And those are for customers that have 500 licenses or more. You can get help with that. And so what a fast track architect will help you do is they'll help you plan and envision where you want to go and what your priorities are from a modernization perspective. If you've got all this stuff on premises and COVID really impacted you, I've had customers tell me that they had students having to drive to the parking lot of the school to get onto the Wi-Fi to activate their machine because the KMS server wasn't accessible and they didn't have VPN or they couldn't get access to applications. Like COVID was a really big problem for a lot of customers from a management perspective. And so customers that had adopted Intune, they didn't have that. They didn't have any of these big COVID challenges because everything was managed remotely already. And so Fast Track can help you do that. Fast Track can help you get started so that if there's another variant or if we shut everything down again, it's possible. If that happens again, you'll be ready. And so Fast Track can help provide some of that guidance as well to onboard your users and then drive adoption internally for training. Because oftentimes we'll have to train our end users on, hey, there's a new experience or there's a new way of doing things. And so Fast Track will help you do that too. So to get started today, you go to Microsoft.com/fast track. You can sign in there, and then you can submit a request for assistance. And if you have any challenges with any of that, you can contact any of your Microsoft account team members. If you have no idea where to go, you can come contact me, and I can help point you in the right direction. And then lastly, some resources. So I mentioned earlier, Windows 11 SE, we have an app. We have a specific applications list that will work on the 11 SE devices. After I'm done sharing this presentation, I'll get out and I'll kind of walk through what those applications are. I'll click into the link and we'll take a look at that there. And then also there's a link here to our various Windows 11 and Windows 11 SE education devices. And so those machines are available today, and you can go and see what hardware is available to you. And so with that, let me stop presenting and then pull up another window here. Give me one sec. Okay, let's share the screen. Okay. So if you go to our docs page, you will see Windows 11 SE for education. And these documents are living documents. We're constantly adding new information about Windows 11 SE. And one of the things that we are constantly updating is this list of available applications. And so from an application perspective, you can see on here what apps are available. And if there is an app that is not available, you can request additional apps to be added that you might need that's not here. And so there's a link somewhere in here for submitting a request. I think it's right, yeah, this link right here. You click on that. If there's an app that you need that's not here, click on that link, submit the request. There's a form you fill out. And then folks from my team will take a look at what you're submitting and see if that application meets the requirements for Windows 11 SE. And they just have to meet this category, these various categories. Things like content filtering. We know customers have all sorts of different content filters out there. You can be running iBoss, Lightspeed. There's just so many that are out there. And so we might not have them all right now. We understand that. So if there's something that you need that's not there, submit the request and we'll have our team evaluate it and then provide the policies to allow that application to run. Same thing for test taking solutions. There are so many different test taking boards that are out there and Win32 apps that need to be leveraged. And so those types of solutions, again, we're not going to have all of them out of the box. But if there's something that you need that's not there, submit that request to us. We'll get the app, we'll get the policy, and we'll get that set up for you. Any assistive technology solutions, so things like screen readers, those types of things, those also meet the requirement bar. Classroom communication apps, diagnostic management, supportability apps. These are the things that we're looking for. That will unblock most customers that may not be able to run Windows 11 SE today because there's something that is missing. Applications also need to meet just the general performance requirements of Windows 11. It can't be some super old app that's going to just be a resource hog. And so we'll look at the app, and if we determine that the performance doesn't meet our performance bar, then the application won't be able to run. And there's some other requirements here that you can go ahead and take a look at on your own. But again, this is the page right now that has all the documentation of what applications are available to run. And with that, let's take a look at the questions here. I know I've got a few folks that have been answering, so I don't know if there's anything I need to directly address. So let's pull this over so you guys can see what I'm looking at. Is Windows 11 a Chromebook type replacement? Sort of. It's a way for us to kind of compete at that level with Chromebook. What's really interesting though is that when you look at these devices, they're going to roughly be about $250, $350, and that's kind of the sweet spot for Chrome. But what we're hearing from customers, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing from customers that Google is now requiring maybe beefier hardware where they need to run with a processor and RAM that's probably about $500, thereabouts. And so with that, a lot of customers are coming to us and saying, hey, Google's increasing their hardware requirements on us, their requirements to run Google Play Store apps and various other things. And so it's requiring us to purchase more expensive Chromebooks. And so now we're really looking at the opportunity here to evaluate Microsoft and see what does Microsoft have to provide from that $200, $300, $400, $500 price point, and is there something that Microsoft can provide us there? So Windows 11 SE does kind of fit that Chromebook mold, where we do request that customers start to look at doing everything out of the cloud and not have so many on-prem, or not on-prem, but so many Win32 apps. And so that's kind of where we're trying to compete on the Windows side of things here. So Ryan answered the question, can Windows 11 SE be deployed via Sccm or MDT? No. 11 SE, actually, you won't have media for it. There's no media that you'll be able to download from volume licensing, so there's no ISO that you'll have access to. In order to get 11 SE devices back to their factory defaults, you can either use the reset inbox or you could use the bare metal recovery media that the OEM provides. But there will be no way for a customer to install 11 SE on their own. Regarding cloud-backed components, do we have other integrations such as Google Drive, Shared Drive, or are we locked into OneDrive as our cloud-backed storage solution? So Google Drive, as I understand it, there's an executable you have to run for G Drive to show up in File Explorer. And so because of that, that won't be allowed to run on 11 SE. Could we allow it? It's software. It's possible we could create a policy for it. I'm not going to say we will. but you probably aren't going to see Google Drive integrated into the File Explorer. This is really primarily for OneDrive because it's all self-contained within Windows. You still could use Google Drive, though. If all the files are stored in the cloud, you won't have the File Explorer integration. So an end user would just have to open up either Chrome or Edge, go to drive.google.com, and upload their files there. So there's nothing that's going to restrict you from doing cloud uploads. You just won't be able to install any executables that will integrate directly with the operating system. Can things like CMD and PowerShell be made to run with admin credentials? Actually, no. So CMD and PowerShell, so the policies that are implemented for 11 SE, those policies are baked into the hardware of the machine. So these aren't policies that are persona driven, right? They're not something that you would assign through Intune or assign to someone, to a specific group of users. It's complete out of the box. Everyone is going to have the same policies applied to them. Is the Windows Package Manager included in Windows 11 SE? Patty answered that question, that Intune will be used for deploying all apps. So Package Manager, actually, I don't know if it's in 11 SE. I don't think it is. But even if it were to be installed, the applications that you would install from there would come via the store, and most of those probably wouldn't be allowed to run. Even if you could get winget to actually execute something, the Defender application control policies that 11 SE uses will probably prevent that from happening. Can Sccm be leveraged with Windows 11 SE if you are in a co-management environment with Intune? Just in general, do devices show up as devices that can be added to collections, as an example? So if the device, well, you won't be able to install the config manager client. So if you're trying to add them as a collection on-prem, you probably won't actually have the device available to do that. Let's see. Intune is the only way to manage 11 SE. If you're interested in following up, yeah, Melanie's there. Mitch is here. Hey, Mitch is here. Where'd he come from? Yeah, so costs there. Can we image 11 SE devices to Windows 11 if needed? No, you won't be able to do that. Windows 11 SE, as I mentioned earlier, there's no way to switch out of 11 SE to 11. You're stuck on 11 SE for that device. And then Clark's asking, at the risk of being too off topic, is the Microsoft Store going to stick around for Windows 11? Yes, the store is going to stick around. I saw that Windows 11 SE does not include the Microsoft Store, and Windows 11 for Education does not support the Microsoft Store from everything I found. The site shows that it is supported. So the store is not going away. Microsoft Store, in Windows 11, in fact, it's a completely new store app. We backported that app to Windows 10. So the store is still going to be there. What's different, though, and what might be confusing some folks, is that the store for business is going away. And that was an announcement we made a while back. A lot of customers were not happy with that announcement. But there is something that's going to be better that is coming this calendar year. You will see a new integration to the store in Intune, and how we're going to leverage winget, or the Windows Package Manager. We will be leveraging that for deploying applications from the store. And if you've been playing with winget or the package manager, you've probably noticed that there are a lot more applications that are there now than there were with the old Windows 10 store. And so the way that I sort of envision this is that, currently today, a lot of customers have to package their applications up. They have to create, if you're making Win32 apps in Intune, you have to create, package everything together, but then you also have to create your requirement rules and your application detection rules. With winget, that should be easier to do with the integration with Intune. And so once that comes, we should see a better integration than what we had with the store for business or the store for education. So wait for that. In the meantime, if you've got apps that you're deploying, you're probably going to be packaging them as Win32 for the foreseeable future until we get that package manager / winget support. Will winget work with SCCM for Windows 11? I don't know. The code's not complete yet on the tooling, so I have no idea what that's going to look like. Yeah, Clark seems to be asking all the questions. So, and Scott's commented to Cornell. Okay, and one thing I wanted to just kind of touch on here from an Intune perspective. Again, we're going to go over this in the Intune specific session, but what I did want to show here is in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. I talked about these in the slides, but I wanted to show this more in a more real world sort of view. So moving to Windows 11, if you are using Intune today for managing devices, or if you're not and you're looking at doing it, we have an option here for feature updates for Windows 10 and later. And a lot of customers actually, as I talk to them, they're actually not aware that this is here, what it's for. But what this does is it allows you to pin, PIN, you're pinning or you're sticking a device to a specific release of Windows. And so a lot of customers get really nervous when Microsoft's going to release some new release of Windows. And so within here, we can say that I want to install, maybe you don't want to do Windows 11, right? Like most of us today don't want Windows 11 on our devices at all because it's too new and it's in the middle of the school year. So you might decide that I want to keep everything on Windows 10 21 H2. And so you'll create your Windows 10 21 H2 feature deployment. And then we can say that we want to make this available ASAP. And these rollout options, these are relatively new. They came out probably in the last couple months. But we can say that we want to make this update available ASAP, or we want to make this available on a specific date. And so as education customers, hey, this is great because I can now control exactly when my updates are going to be available to my devices. So school ends in May. You know, in June, I can say, hey, I want to make this, okay, I know this is Windows 10 21 H2, but let's pretend that we're doing Windows 11. And so we want to do Windows 11, and we want to do this on, you know, I don't know, May or June. So let's do it on my birthday, June 14th. So we're going to select that, and then now we're on our way to getting Windows 11 deployed on those devices. So this is something new that a lot of customers aren't aware of, and this makes it really easy to manage your update releases. If you're using SCCM, you're kind of already doing this today, right? You're downloading from the SCCM environment, you're creating collections, you already have collections created, deploying out the application. Now we've got that capability directly in Intune. Before, what you had to do, which is kind of silly, but before what you had to do is you're using update rings. And so your update rings, you'd have to go through, I'm just going to grab one of these at random, but you'd have to control this feature update deferral period option. And so you're playing this game of, you know, I could only control this by a certain number of days. And it was just kind of this really weird experience. I'm like, hey, like, you know, delaying my feature releases for 300 some odd days. Like, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. So if you are doing this today, if you're still using update rings, change this to 0 and then leverage, I'm gonna not save that, leverage what I just showed previously, going to feature updates, going into here, and then using this to control when your feature updates are deployed. So that way you're not getting Windows 11 accidentally deployed. You're making sure that your devices are stuck to a specific release, and then you can come into here next summer and select whatever release that you want. And so that's one thing I wanted to call out. The other thing I wanted to call out, under reports within Intune, this is where we can look at Endpoint Analytics, what I talked about earlier. And with Endpoint Analytics, under the Work From Anywhere, now again, no idea why we put this under Work From Anywhere. It's kind of a weird place to put this. But for your Windows 11 rollouts and Windows 11 readiness, this is where we show you all your devices in your environment, and are they ready to move to Windows 11? Are they capable or are they not capable? Or have they already been upgraded? So you have this available to you today through Endpoint Analytics. And you can start to generate the data. You can go set up Endpoint Analytics. start getting the data collected so you can come and see if your machines are ready to go to Windows 11 or not. And just one other thing that I want to call out for Endpoint Analytics, because I think this is probably one of the coolest things we've ever made, is Endpoint Analytics gives you proactive information about all of your devices. So it's not just, hey, here's Windows 11, but how are my devices booting up? How fast do they boot up? What's taking them so long to boot up? And so we can look at boot scores. We can look at sign-in scores. We can look at device performance. I can go look at individual devices in here to see how long they're taking to boot. And if I look at a specific machine here, look at this one. Like on a per machine basis, I can look at all the boot history of a machine. I can look at all the sign-in history. How long is it taking to sign in to get to a desktop? How long is it taking to get to a responsive desktop? What's the difference there? Well, a responsive desktop is just a machine where the CPU is down below 50%. So if the CPU is below 50%, now I can use the machine. Things are going to be relatively performant. And so within here, I've got all this information about when the devices were restarted, but also was there a failure? Was there a blue screen? Come and see what that is. And if I see a lot of blue screens on my machines, there's another report I can look at from application reliability perspective. Now, I don't have a lot of crashes in my lab, but if you had a lot of crashes on your machines, a lot of blue screens, we can come in here and we can look to see which application is causing that crash. And if it's consistent for a lot of different machines, chances are that application probably needs to be updated. Or maybe there's a driver that's causing a bunch of blue screens. Those drivers need to be updated. So you have proactive information here for Endpoint Analytics. So if you haven't turned this on yet, do it, because you're going to get all this information here, but you're also going to get the Windows 11 readiness as well. All right, let's see, there's more questions are coming in here. Blog posts here. Cool. Okay. What's the primer on how to turn on? Great question. So to turn it on, so our Endpoint Analytics documentation has all of the guidance. From a licensing perspective, let's talk about this quick, because I'm not sure how the licensing is for all of you guys here. But A3, if you've got A3, you're completely covered. If you do not have A3 licensing, then you won't be able to leverage Endpoint Analytics. So keep that in mind. But outside of that, there's some quick starts here on how to enroll Intune devices. If you've got SCCM, there's some quick starts there as well. So I put this here in chat. It's actually a pretty quick, installation, or a pretty quick configuration. Effectively, it should just be going into, under reports, go to Endpoint Analytics, and then there should be a settings node here. And then you'll have to go through the Intune data collection policy. When there's like a button to click here. When you click that, it will create a policy under configuration profiles, and it'll be for Intune data collection policy. You'll want to turn this, or you want to deploy this rather to, I have it deployed to all of my devices. You can deploy that to whatever group you want in Intune. And then that'll start to collect all of the data. And it'll take a little while for the data to come in. Could take probably about 48, 72 hours for you to start seeing the data. So it's not going to be immediate. So turn it on a Thursday or Friday, get back next week. You should start seeing some of that data start to show up. Okay, what else? Geez, Melanie, you're offering my time, geez. No, it's all good.
Sorry. But just remind everyone, if you do have any questions or you're interested in a follow-up, don't forget to email me and I can help coordinate that. This was a great session. Thank you so much, Richard. Very, very amazing presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Yeah, glad. And then I think Richard's got a question here. Is that the same as the Windows Health Monitoring policy? Yes, it's the same thing. We just create one for you automatically. But if you are doing the health monitoring policy, I recommend you turn on both that and the Windows updates you can see here, health, it's the profile types, health monitoring. So it's the same exact one. But I do recommend that you turn on both Endpoint Analytics and Windows Updates, because the Windows Updates piece will start to fill in. There's some additional data that you get from Windows feature updates under reporting. I think it's here. There's a few different places where we have Windows Update data that flows in that will require that under Windows Health Monitoring, the Windows Update stuff to be turned on. So you want to do both of those. But with that, I think, are we at time, or did we have till 15?
We had until 15, but if there's no further questions, we can wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've got nothing else to offer. I'm just answering questions or whatever else people have. So, but I'm good to wrap too. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. It's great speaking to you all. And again, I'll get the deck out so you guys will have access to that, because there's some links in there that might be interesting to you. And again, if you have any questions, just let us know, and we'll get them answered.
Looks like we had one question come in from Scott. Will we ever see Advanced Defender for A3?
No, you're not going to see. When you say Advanced Defender, I assume, Scott, you're meaning like Windows Defender for endpoints, or Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, which is now Windows Defender for endpoints. Unfortunately, there's not going to be a way for us to do that, and it really just comes down to the amount of data that gets collected from the endpoints for all your students. It's so much data that gets collected, because remember, it's kind of like the black box of an airplane. Like, we're looking at every single process and thing that a user is doing, and just the amount of data that we have to collect on that, it's a lot. And so we've tried numerous times to get this implemented for A3 and for student use benefit, but just from a cost perspective, it's too expensive for us to gather all that data for every single student, not just in the US, but globally. It's just too much for us to do, unfortunately. All right, guys. Well, take care. Have a good rest of your week and weekend, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you again.